Hey guys, I gotta tell you, when I heard that they were making a Last of Us TV adaptation, I was worried. The Last of Us, at least to me, is in the upper echelon of video games as far as expressing itself as a genuine art. It was so much more than just a game, actually. It was one of the last big AAA boundary-pushing games for the PS3, like the tail end to a generation. Graphically, at the time, it was nearly untouched, and honestly, it still holds up pretty well today. The gameplay was as smooth as anything in its time, and the detail and care in every aspect of the level design was out of this world. But separate from just the video gamey stuff, the Last of Us's narrative was that of loss, struggle, and love, and of a caliber that honestly few fictions in general are able to properly manage. Playing as Joel as he fought tooth and nail to transport Ellie across the United States was an emotional journey that I wish I could do over again for the first time. The slow progression of his heart opening up to the girl that he initially was so indifferent to, Ellie learning of the world and finally having a protector that she can rely on, and seeing the depths of sacrifice that both of them could struggle through in order to succeed on their mission, it all just was so harrowing and touching and raw and dark and pretty much everything it needed to be. And video game adaptations are usually not that. Video games that are turned into cinema or television are usually not done so because the fans have demanded it, or the original creative team wanting to parlay the story to a different fictional medium. They are done because of money. And a lot of that leads to inauthenticity in how the experience of the games are translated to the screen. I mean, I hope I don't have to talk about The Prince of Persia, and Mortal Kombat, and Uncharted, and Hitman, but you get my point. So a live-action version of The Last of Us, one of the most lauded games ever on HBO, it was not a hopeful time for me, honestly, I'm gonna be real with you. But then the first few dribbles came in about the casting. I heard the lead role was going to Pedro Pascal, and I love me some Game of Thrones, and he was amazing in there, so that was nice to hear. Then I heard another Game of Thrones alumni had been cast as Ellie, Bella Ramsey, who played Lyanna Mormont. That made me even more excited. But a cast can only get you so far. You need good writing to tell a good story and carry it forward. And even though the story of The Last of Us is phenomenal, there's no getting around that, so much of the riveting experience came from you as the player piloting the game, struggling yourself as Joel, figuring out the issues and overcoming the obstacles actively. Depicting a narrative in a more passive experience like television calls for a distinctly different approach to that narrative. And wow, the show really pulls it through. I think one of the best things it does is completely change the pacing of the introduction and the framing of the opening moments. In the game, you start off pretty much immediately in the zombie apocalypse. There might be like 5 or 10, 15 minutes of downtime, but it's all pretty fast. The world nearly instantly descends into chaos, and you are thrust into the center of fiery pandemonium. In the show, though, things are much slower, and for a purposeful reason. Since you, the viewer, are by definition in a passive role when it comes to the progression of the story, it needs more time to be able to sink you into the twists and turns of the narrative. Since you can't actively struggle with the conflict yourself through direct control, you must become more intimately acquainted with it through organic world building, context clues, and character investment. This all means making original content not seen in the game. It could not be a one-to-one adaptation. It means more deeply establishing us in the bond shared by Joel and Sarah. It means showing us the mundanity of the simple, enjoyable life that they lost. And it means pulling us through a slower, more insidious, creeping tension that plays with our expectations of when the hat will finally drop. The show takes to the next level with the game already established in its opening, focusing on Sarah. By putting us in the shoes of a little girl, the game makes the apocalypse around us that much more terrifying. But gamers, at least those that had been around the bush a little bit, knew that we would not be playing as Sarah for long. Everything about Sarah in the opening minutes of the game revolved around Joel. Her wants, her needs, her development. As a character, it was all Joel-centric. We spend all of a handful of minutes as her, and that little time is extremely limited gameplay-wise, to just be looking at things and walking around. Sarah was our introduction into the game world, but Joel was always our driving force through it. That is completely flipped in the first episode of the show, though. Sarah is taken from simply being a representative in the narrative to being portrayed as the main character of the show. The storyline follows her. We see her separate from Joel, interacting with members of the community, engaging with her own actions, and showing her own interests and agency. The entire opening of the show brilliantly used the innocence and fragility of Sarah in ominously dangerous situations to make us feel for her safety just as much as if we were controlling her. It was the senior citizens that she cared for that ended up as the first victims of the infection on screen. We are centered on her loss and humanity before anyone else's. And this also sets up Joel as a side character, almost equivalent to Tommy, there to help Sarah out of situations that she physically can't escape herself. This opening of the show is just over 30 minutes long, more than twice as long as the game's opening, and it uses this time, misdirection, and constructed intimacy all in service to translating one of the most powerful moments in gaming history to the screen.
Sarah? Move your hands, babe. I know, baby, I know. Oh. I know, baby, I know. I know it hurts.
The show had framed itself as being set up around Sarah's story. She was the focus. She was the POV. She was the child in a world where only adults were seen dying. And in an instant, that all changed. She was taken from we watchers just as we were starting to get invested in and know her. And we had to sit with the pain of watching her father mourn her as Sarah died in his arms. And this tragedy transitions us out of the introduction of the show to what it's actually about. Joel. We see that 20 years in the future, he is a husk of the man he once was. He literally lost his world because of a fungal apocalypse, but he figuratively lost his world because of the death of his daughter. He is empty now, peddling drugs and scraping by. HBO chose to adapt The Last of Us correctly by not overloading us with exposition about the economic and military state of the world. It didn't immediately ram us in the face with how Joel met Tess. In fact, it didn't bother telling us nearly anything about the world. It showed us interesting aspects of the setting by making the characters we care about move through it. We see the corruption, we see the violence, and we see the toll it takes. Everything is just played so close to the chest, and it treats us as viewers like real adults with a stomach for patience, rather than children who need to be spoon-fed why to care. The show doesn't even reveal to us the real conflict until the very end. We are first given a red herring, Joel's search for Tommy, which is honestly really compelling and truly believable on its own given what we know about him. Joel had his daughter taken from him, so of course he would be obsessed with finding the only family he has left. It puts Joel in this really interesting paradigm of being a broken man who is still looking for ways to fix himself. But then, all of the pieces of the narrative come together when Ellie's journey is put at the center of the story. She is teased as being special for the whole episode, and only in the literal closing moments is revealed that Ellie is immune to the infection. And in another brilliant move, the episode just ends on that bombshell, along with the bombshell of Joel's near psychotic break where he beats a man he knew to death. Should we like Joel at all after this? Why is Ellie immune? What's the infected zone they're going to like? If you have questions and inquiries, if you want answers, you are forced to tune in next week. The best thing about The Last of Us show is its ability to properly pace active video game material and translate it to passive visual mediums. Every minute of screen time was devoted to some aspect of building up the story in a way that the games couldn't. Being locked on Joel's POV in-game limits our perspective of the world, but a film camera can be anywhere on anyone at any time. It works double time in grounding and organically educating us on the world and the struggles within. I'm quite honestly kind of astounded at how well all of this has translated across platforms, but the inner game nerd in me is rejoicing either way. This seems distinctly different from all the soulless video game cash grabs that came before, and I certainly hope that continues. Anyway, thanks for watching all the way unto the end. If you have a suggestion for what I should talk about next, leave a comment. My New Year's resolution is to read literally all of them. If you like what you heard, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. As always, it was a pleasure, and I will talk to you all again soon.